We live in an age obsessed with identity, race, gender, sexuality, oppression. Every conversation about politics, art, or even science now runs through a moral filter. Who has privilege? Who is marginalized? Who gets to speak? It's not just social media or activism, it's academia, journalism, education, even corporate policy. But how did we get here? How did ideas once confined to obscure graduate seminars come to redefine truth, justice, and morality for an entire generation? Today, we're diving into Cynical Theories, Helen Pluckrose and James Lindsay's bold and controversial examination of how activist scholarship transformed culture. A book that asks a question few dare to. Have our efforts to create equality actually created new forms of dogma? Chapter 1. The Birth of Skepticism. To understand today's ideological battles, Pluckrose and Lindsay say we have to go back to the 1960s and 70s, when a group of French philosophers began to question everything. Their names are familiar: Michel Foucault, Jacques Derrida, Jean-François Lyotard, and Jacques Lacan. They weren't activists. They were skeptics. They doubted that any universal truth could exist. Science, morality, and even reason itself, they said, were simply products of power. Postmodernism replaced the search for truth with the struggle for power. These thinkers saw human life as constructed through discourses, systems of language that decide what is true and what is false. In their view, there were no objective facts, only competing stories, and those stories always served someone's interest. At first, this radical skepticism was confined to philosophy departments. It was fascinating, playful, but largely academic. Even its inventors weren't sure what to do with it politically. Then something changed. Chapter 2. From Philosophy to Activism. By the late 1980s, scholars began to turn postmodern ideas into tools for activism. Pluckrose and Lindsay call this transition applied postmodernism. If old postmodernists doubted truth, applied postmodernists weaponized that doubt. They used the idea that knowledge is a social construct to challenge what they saw as systems of oppression built into science, history, and law. Out of this shift grew critical race theory, gender studies, queer theory, and post-colonial theory. Each began with valuable insights, pointing out blind spots in history and culture, but over time, something deeper happened. Skepticism hardened into moral certainty. The question who holds power became who deserves to speak. What began as a critique of knowledge became a replacement of knowledge. The authors argue that this is where the movement's tone changed, from curiosity to orthodoxy. Chapter 3. The New Epistemology. In traditional liberalism, ideas compete in open debate. Evidence matters. Claims can be proven wrong. But in the new critical framework, truth isn't discovered, it's experienced. Knowledge, in this worldview, comes from one's position within systems of oppression. The marginalized, it says, see reality more clearly because they live its consequences. This is why terms like lived experience became central. The most important knowledge is not found in research or reason, but in lived experience, particularly that of marginalized people. For Pluckrose and Lindsay, this creates what they call epistemic tribalism. Different groups each claiming their own truth, none subject to external challenge. If all knowledge is tied to identity, then disagreement itself becomes oppression. And suddenly, debate, the core of liberal society, becomes dangerous. Chapter 4. Language as Power. Foucault once wrote that power is everywhere because it comes from everywhere. Modern activists took that seriously, perhaps too seriously. Pluckrose and Lindsay describe how the new theories treat language not as a tool of expression, but as an instrument of domination. Words can harm, we are told. Silence can harm too. Even neutrality is suspect. In this worldview, speech is violence, and therefore must be managed, reinterpreted, or censored. Critical theories recast the liberal commitment to free speech as a mechanism of oppression, a way the powerful protect their privilege. The result, the authors argue, is a culture where intent matters less than interpretation, where we no longer ask, "What did you mean?" but "What power does your language serve?" Chapter 5. Critical Race Theory. One of the most influential branches of applied postmodernism is critical race theory. It emerged from American law schools in the late 1980s, challenging the idea that colorblindness and meritocracy were enough to end racism. Scholars, like Derek Bell, Kimberly Crenshaw, and Richard Delgado, argued that racism is not just prejudice but systemic. It lives in policies, norms, and institutions. Pluckrose and Lindsay acknowledge that this insight began with legitimate concerns, but they argue that it often replaces the goal of equality with the pursuit of equity, proportional outcomes defined by race. Where liberalism seeks equal treatment, critical race theory seeks equal results. They warn that this shift transforms moral aspiration into bureaucratic control, turning racial identity into a permanent political category. The irony, they suggest, is that in trying to transcend race, we have institutionalized it. Chapter 6. Queer Theory and Gender Activism. Queer theory, another child of postmodernism, sought to dismantle binary ideas of sex and gender. It introduced concepts like performativity, fluidity, and the social construction of identity. Originally, it celebrated freedom, the right to live outside rigid norms, but Pluckrose and Lindsay argue that it later became prescriptive, demanding ideological conformity rather than individual liberation. To queer something is not to liberate it, but to problematize it endlessly. This endless critique, they say, has spilled beyond academia, into medicine, education, and law, often turning policy into moral ritual. For the authors, the tragedy is that genuine progress for gay and trans rights risks being undermined by an ideology that sees stability itself as oppression. Chapter 7. Feminism and Intersectionality. Modern feminism, through intersectionality, sought to include race, class, and sexuality, recognizing that oppression is layered and complex. Yet, Pluckrose and Lindsay claim intersectionality has shifted from being an analytic tool to a hierarchy of moral authority. Intersectionality began as a map of disadvantage. It has become a map of virtue. They argue that within this framework, individual women's experiences matter less than their group identity, leading to internal policing within feminism itself. In this worldview, solidarity gives way to suspicion. Who speaks from the most oppressed position? And with that, the possibility of universal womanhood, or universal humanity, disappears. Chapter 8. The Postmodern Religion. Here lies the book's most controversial argument. Pluckrose and Lindsay claim that today's critical social justice movement has taken on the structure of a religion. It has original sin, and like any dogma, it has heresy, disagreement. Social justice functions as a secular faith, offering meaning and moral purpose to those who have lost them elsewhere. They are not mocking belief, but warning against certainty. When morality becomes ideology, they argue, dialogue ends, and society fractures into competing moral tribes. Chapter 9. Liberalism's Defense. For Pluckrose and Lindsay, The answer isn't cynicism, it's liberalism. They argue that liberalism, despite its flaws, remains humanity's best framework for progress, not because it's perfect, but because it allows correction. Liberalism is self-correcting. It needs no holy truths, only open debate. The authors call for a return to principles that once defined the Enlightenment: free speech, reason, individual rights, universal humanism. They remind us that these values have historically delivered the very freedoms critical theorists now enjoy. Chapter 10. The Critics. No documentary would be complete without addressing the backlash. Many scholars accused Pluckrose and Lindsay of oversimplifying complex theories, of painting diverse movements with a single brush. They argue that Cynical Theories ignores the genuine injustices that inspired these movements. Others defend the book as an essential warning, a wake-up call to resist the creeping authoritarianism of ideological purity. Whether you see it as alarmist or prophetic, one thing is certain. The book hit a nerve, because it speaks to a deeper unease in our culture, a fear that we've traded open inquiry for moral theater. Chapter 11. The Human Cost. At its heart, Cynical Theories is not a book about politics. It's a book about people, and how we think. It asks, what happens when empathy becomes ideology? When compassion turns into control? When justice stops asking questions and starts issuing decrees? The pursuit of social justice is noble, but when it becomes a totalizing worldview, it ceases to be just. Pluckrose and Lindsay don't deny oppression exists. They simply believe the cure cannot come from the same cynicism that caused it. Chapter 12. Final Reflections. Every generation invents its own faith and its own heresies. Postmodernism began as a philosophy of doubt. It became a politics of certainty. And now perhaps we stand at a crossroads between the freedom to question and the fear of being questioned. Cynical Theories doesn't offer easy answers, but it does offer a challenge to think freely, even when it's uncomfortable, because truth, however imperfect, remains our best tool against tyranny, whether religious, political, or ideological. We must learn again to disagree, honestly, openly, without fear, for that is the essence of a free society. If you found this exploration thought-provoking, subscribe for more deep dives into the ideas shaping our world.